Resource guarding is a really normal behavior, but that doesn't mean that it's something that we should leave unaddressed. It's worth mentioning that humans resource guard all the time. We actually go to great lengths to guard our resources. We lock doors, we get alarm systems, we install cameras. With our dogs, if we see that they are worried about someone taking their resource, it's our job to manipulate the environment so that they aren't worried. And if that management of the resource guarding is not something that feels sustainable, or the risk of a management oops is too big, or it's inhibiting quality of life in such a way that is unsustainable, then we address the resource guarding with behavior therapy. Resource guarding behavior is very nuanced. There are a lot of variables to consider. It's important when addressing this or when working with a professional to address this that all of these variables are being taken into consideration. When we address a behavior concern, we have to break down the criteria finely enough that the dog can be successful, that they can stay in a good learning brain, and that they feel safe and comfortable. So, with resource guarding, that means we don't want the dog to be in a position during our work where they are worried the resource is going to be taken. And so we need to look at all of these different variables and control for all of these different variables so that we can make sure that's the case. So, first up, what is the dog guarding? Dogs can guard anything just like humans can. Some really common things to guard include food, treats, people or affection, spaces, toys, chews, stolen items, and really, the list goes on. Anything is on the table. And there's no hierarchy to this. So I think a lot of times people have the assumption that if their dog is guarding something, then they will also be guarding their food. And I think that's because food is the thing that we think of most often when we think of resource guarding. But some dogs have no guarding issues around their food, but will have guarding issues around other things. So it's important to identify what the dog is guarding, and that's for safety, and it's also for behavior therapy. Then we want to know, who is the dog guarding from? Some dogs will guard from other dogs, but no one else. Some dogs will guard from other people, but no one else. Some dogs will guard from specific dogs or specific people, or even other pets or animals. They may guard more intensely with certain people or animals than from others. And that matters when we're saying we want to start with the easiest thing. And then within that, we have to consider things like the angle of approach of the other being. Some dogs are going to have a harder time with I'm going to say the person approaching head on, but this could also be dogs or cats or other animals. Or they might have a harder time with the person coming from an angle. Or they might have an easier or harder time with the person approaching from behind or approaching from the front. So that matters. The speed at which the being is approaching. For some dogs, approaching quickly is harder because it's happening really fast and it's intense. For others, approaching slowly is going to be harder. Think like Jaws' theme song, it gives time for the tension to build. Within that, the distance of approach can also play a role and might be easier or harder for a dog. A great distance might be harder, or a shorter distance might be harder. How long the dog has had the item, been in the space, has been with the person, whatever the resource is. Some dogs will guard a chew intensely when they first get it, but less and less as they chew on it. For some dogs, it's the opposite. They won't guard in the beginning, but once they've really kind of gotten into it, now they're guarding more intensely. Or when they first get into a space, they may be guarding that, but then guard it less or not guard it at all once they're settled in. And for some dogs, it'll be the opposite. We need to look at where this behavior occurs. Sometimes resource guarding appears in one environment, but not another. And that can have to do with how stressed the dog already is. Sometimes dogs will guard when they don't feel well, but not at other times. Sometimes dogs will guard things in specific locations because the item is more or less valuable in that location. And honestly, the list goes on. There are a lot of variables that need to be considered. So, whether you're approaching this on your own as a pet parent or you're working with a professional, it's really important to look at those variables. The book Mine by Jean Donaldson, it's a much older book, but it has really good, really relevant information, and really can help you consider all of these variables. So, I recommend that if you're dealing with a resource guarding problem, check out Mine by Jean Donaldson. Let's also talk about what resource guarding is not. Resource guarding is not your dog trying to dominate you, the human. You don't need to pee on their items. You don't need to take their items away from them. You don't need to show them who's boss. In fact, these interventions can make things worse. And for the love of God, please do not stick your hand in your dog's food bowl. The goal of behavior therapy around resource guarding is to teach the dog that their resource is safe. No one wants their resource. No one is trying to take it. If you had something that you really valued and I kept coming up and stealing it from you and then making you do something to get it back, you would probably guard the resource more and more and more. You'd probably get pretty annoyed with me. It might deteriorate our relationship and our trust. What we do want to do is first, make sure we're ruling out any underlying health problems. Behavior concerns are often comorbid with health problems, particularly if this is happening in young puppies, if this is happening anytime before adolescence, if this is happening, if this is a new behavior, or if this is a recently exacerbated behavior. Those are red flags for a health check, particularly if there are no other obvious causes or reasons for those changes. And then we want to put our management in place. And sometimes management is our long-term solution. So if I have two dogs who are resource guarding their food bowls from each other, or one of the dogs is resource guarding their food from the other dog, often the easiest thing to do is just to feed them separately, to just feed one in another room or outside or in a crate or an X pen, or but to physically and visually separate them. And a lot of times that's going to be much easier than going through a behavior therapy protocol, and that's fine. But sometimes the management required isn't sustainable, or it's impeding on quality of life, or the risk of a management oops is too high. And so we want to address it with behavior therapy. And we're largely going to do that through counter conditioning. We want to teach the dog that the approach of the other being is not a threat, but in fact is something positive. We might also do this through games like Voluntary Sharing, is a really great game where the resource guarder gets control of the resource and they are able to share it with the other dog or the cat or the other pet, and the other animal getting the resource predicts that our resource guarder gets the resource. We're often also working on building resilience through building things like agency, communication, consent, building the ability to self-regulate, working on lowering baseline stress levels for our dogs that are resource guarding and dysregulated. And then the last thing I want to talk about here is, what does resource guarding look like? Because sometimes it's really obvious. Sometimes it is biting, barking, snarling, growling, lunging. But sometimes it's more subtle. But if we can catch it early, then we can prevent it from escalating. And we have to do less work to undo that behavior or to change that behavior. So before you're seeing tension in the body, freezing over the food bowl, hard staring, lifting the lip, growling, barking, lunging, biting, there are more subtle signs to look for. With people, this can look like the dog getting in between the other dog or person and their guarded person. Around a food bowl, it might look like weight shifting, just like kind of shifting around their bowl or their snuffle mat or their licky mat. It might look like chewing on their bone more intensely when someone comes near. It can be little pauses or side eyes in consuming the treats or food or chews. It can be taking their item away for later. Some dogs will say, this is too valuable for me to enjoy right now around these other people or dogs, so I'm going to take it over here. And then when they're less stressed or they have more space, then they can enjoy that item. Sometimes it even looks like a dog who will only enjoy their item with someone else around. And that can be confusing. But sometimes what happens is a dog might be, let's say, just for example, they're too stressed to eat right now. And they're like, oh, I couldn't possibly, my digestive system is offline. But then the other dog comes into the room and they're like, wait a minute, is the other dog going to get my thing? And then they're so worried about that it overrides the other stressor and they're like, I better eat my thing. Resource guarding is one of the top 3 reasons for intra-household conflict, up there with tight spaces and arousal. So it is definitely worth addressing, especially if you have other pets in the home that the dog guards from.